Hi, this video will be on multiplying unit fractions. Now I'm going to start with some integers and then we'll talk about how that will help us with multiplying the unit fractions. So let's start with the number 8 and I'm going to multiply that by 2. So what I have here is 8 and I make it twice as big, so the answer should be 16. We'll try again with 8 times 3. So this time I have 8 and I'm going to make that 3 times as big, and that will be 24. So now I'm going to multiply 8 by a fraction, so 8 times by a half. So I'm going to use the same language I used here. So I've got 8 times by a half, so I'm going to have 8 and I'm going to make it half as big, and that will be 4. And let's try one more. 8 times a quarter, and again I'm going to use the same language. I've got 8 and times by a quarter, so that will be 8, and I'm making it a quarter as big, and that will be 2. Okay, now we're going to use the fraction. So let's start with a half times a half. So I'll have a half here times by another half. So if I say I've got half and I'm going to make that half as big, now I know that one's going to be a quarter, but I'm going to draw a diagram to show you how we come to that. So I'm going to draw a rectangle, and this is going to represent a whole, and then I'm going to split it in the middle, and this is a half. Okay, and if I make that a half as big, so I've got half here and I'm going to make that half as big, so I'm going to split it into half. So now we've got this size here. This is my answer. So I've got half and I made it half as big, so this is my answer, this one. And I can see that this is 1/4 because there's this one here, there's another quarter here, and there'll be 2 quarters here. So this answer is 1/4. Let's try another one. Let's try a third, and I'm going to multiply that by a half. Okay, this one might be a little bit harder to think about, but let's draw another diagram. So again, I'm going to have a rectangle, and I'm going to split this one into thirds. So this is my third here. So I've got 1/3, and I need to make it half as big. So I need to split that into 2. So I'll make it like that. So my answer is going to be this bit here. So I have 1/3, that's 1/3, and I've made it half as big. Now what size is this in relation to the whole bar? So how many of these fit into the whole bar I need to think about. So I've got one of these here, I've got another one, and I can see I'm going to have 2 in this box as well, and 2 in this box. So this will actually be a sixth, because I'll have 1/6, 2/6, then there'll be 3, 4, there'll be 5, and 6/6. So this size here is 1/6. So my answer is going to be 1/6. Let's try another one. Let's try with a fifth. So let's have 1/5, and we'll multiply that by a half again. So again, I'm going to draw a rectangle here. Okay, and I need to split this into fifths. Okay, so there's my 5 sections. They're not very nicely drawn, but this is my 1/5, so I'm gonna call that 1/5. And so I've got 1/5, and I'm gonna have to make it half as big, so I need to split this into 2. So let me just complete this. So that's my answer here. That's the answer that I'm looking for. Now, to find this answer, I need to know how many of these will fit all the way through. Now remember, I had 1/5 here, and I made it half as big, and there were 5/5 all the way to the end. Now if I split each of these into 2, what I actually have is 5 of the fifths, and I'm going to multiply it by 2 because each of them will be split into 2, like this. And what you can see now is that I'll have 10 sections. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So my answer to 1/5 times a half is 1/10. And again, I'm going to use that language. So we started with 1/5. I made it half as big, and this size here is 1/10. Let's try another one. This time I'll multiply by a fraction other than half. So let's try a third. Let's try a third, and we'll times that by a quarter. Okay, so again, this time I'm going to draw another rectangle. Okay, and I'm going to split it into thirds because that's what I'm starting with, and this is my 1/3 here. Okay, so what I have is a third, and I need to make it a quarter as big. So making it a quarter as big would be dividing this into 4 equal sections. So let's try and do that. So now I have 4 equal sections here. That is my answer here. So I've got a third, and I made it a quarter as big. So I've taken a third and I divided it by 4. And this is what I'm left with. So what's the answer to that bit? Now to find this answer, I know that I've got a third here, I've got another third, and I've got another third. Now this size would be, okay, so I've looked at a third and I've divided it by 4. And I've got 3 thirds here altogether. So if I divide this by 4 and that by 4 as well, what I will have is 4, 8, 12. So that's the same as 4 times 3. And that's going to be 1/12. So my answer to this is going to be 1/12. And you'll notice a pattern here. So what we have here, when we had a third times a half, we can see that 3 times 2 gives me 6. And I know how that came when I look at the diagram. And again, when I had 1/5 times a half, 5 times 2 gives me 10. And again, I know how it came from my diagram. And finally, I had a third times a quarter, and 3 times 4 gives me 12. And I can see how that would come from here, because we started with a third, we made it a quarter as big, which is the same as dividing by 4. And then I know there's 4 of these in each box, and there's 3 boxes all the way through. So what I will have is 4 here, 4 here, and 4 here, and that is 12 altogether. So one of these is 1/12. So my answer is going to be 1/12. Now what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to do some of your own. So I'll write you some questions here. So let's do 1/5 times that by 1/3. Now I'd like you to answer this, not just answer this, but also draw the diagram like I have. Now let's do another one. Let's do 1/4 times by a half. And one more. Let's have 1/3 times by 1/5. Okay, so you can see that this and this will actually give the same answer, but your diagrams will be different, and I want to see the 2 different diagrams for these. So answer these questions and then bring that to the lesson.